Welcome to the MKE Arts Live podcast. My name is Adam Carr. I'm the host of the show, as well as this podcast. You are joining us for our Women of Impact episode and an interview with our featured guest, Deb Farris. She is the executive director of Danceworks, and she is just an incredible person. In the coming hour or so, we're going to explore her life, which began here in Milwaukee and continues through her work at Danceworks. And we explored all kinds of different topics. That's kind of the nature of what we do here. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Deb, and also the MKE Arts Live episode built around Women of Impact in this conversation, which you can see on YouTube. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Deb. I think there's just
YouTube. I know.
Yeah.
How do you rise above it?
Right.
You know, not live in that fear, that place. When there's pain and violence going on around you, how do you carry peace into it and courage? You know,
Yeah.
that's the challenge every day. But if we didn't do that, what would be left? Nothing but fear and violence. So we've got to be torchbearers of that, each of us in our own way, regardless of what the situations are in our lives.
And I think you probably, I was talking to someone about this yesterday, just what you're exposed to on a daily basis. And I'm sure the way that the work exists, you're not as front line maybe as would be.
I try to be. I try to stay there.
But
I have to do a lot of admin, but I try to get out.
Sure.
I have to be in the studio. I have to be in the community where our programs are regularly, or I start losing my the pulse.
Sure. So to see what you guys facilitate in Milwaukee now, in the many different spaces and the way it looks, that's a good lifeline for you. I'm sure that you're fed by the work that you do with something that's nourishing for, that could be a contrast to the panic that I think we're kind of constantly consuming through the media.
Yeah, and it is the media, and it's always been there. I think my dad was from Milwaukee. I was born in Milwaukee, River West, Humboldt. I lived in a duplex, and my mom found a farm in Brookfield. We lived with the in-laws upstairs, and it was $75 a month, 10 acres, a barn, and my dad always wanted horses because of the horses that delivered the milk in the neighborhood that he grew up, Wilkie's Dairy Farm. And that would allow for some horses. And we moved out to Brookfield. And Dad was very city-centered. So we always our church was on 4th and Meineke, and we did a lot of back and forth. But what brought us back was one time we were coming back from a camping trip, and they wouldn't allow us into the city because the National Guard had shut it down. It was when, 60s.
Summer of 67.
Yeah, and that's when Dad said, that's enough, we're coming back in town. And we moved back into the city. They put us in public schools, and I went to the school where the first busing happened, Riverside, and it didn't work then and it doesn't work now. But the violence, though, has always been here, and the violence that was going on then, well, your mom's a living testament to that, and as are you. But it's what do you, I think that's foundation for me, that heartbeat that I inherited from my parents to want to be a part of the city and make things good. That's what drives you. And my mom, Women of Impact, if she taught me anything, and she taught me a lot that I refuted and took me a long time to, open up my mind to and my heart to, stubborn as I was, but it was to be thankful in all situations. And I watched her endure cancer for 15 years and pretty much model that through all the pain, and that gratitude, that sense of gratitude. And you got to have faith, whatever that means to you, however you interpret it, but that ability to see the unseen. You're not there yet, but you're transforming into it, and you have your vision on that. And I think that's how I've been able to stay at Danceworks for 16 years and begin to see the real impact of of people that commit to things and work together and fight through the hard stuff.
Can you talk a little bit? Thank you for that beautiful run of thought. Can you talk a little bit about it? Because I've been working on the open housing marches for the last 2 years or so, and as part of the coordinating committee. And what you just described is sort of the opposite of the trend of behaviors of white families in Milwaukee, which is that your family, upon, we're kind of on the outskirts looking in and said, that does it, we're coming in. And for a lot of folks, it was the exact opposite. That the summer of 67 and then many other things happened. There was sort of the racial fear element drove a lot of folks said, we can choose to get out of Milwaukee, so we're going to do that. Can you talk a little bit about what led to your family making the reverse decision there?
Well, I think that both of my parents were always a bit of revolutionaries. They were willing to do the opposite of what maybe they had hoped to be able to do. My mom, for one, put my dad through college, dropped out of college so he could study to become an architect. And my dad, as an architect, at the point in his career when he should have really been taking off, he determined, he did a lot of churches, and he came to the point of recognizing within himself the church isn't about a building. And so he did the opposite. And when he'd get called in for a job, they had to convince him that they really needed a building or he wouldn't take the job. And people had said at the time that was professional suicide, but it's that, you're going against the grain to stand for what you believe in, what's important in life. And that's going to be different than what's going on around you generally, I think.
And it's bad for the bottom line a lot of times. I mean, the concept of blockbusting, that was driven it was using racial fear to make individuals think about their bottom line, which then made them do something irrational. So blockbusting was when a black family would move into a block, and then real estate folks would come and say to every white family on the block, well, there's a black family on the block. Your house, the housing prices around here are going to crater. You have to sell now. And then they'd flip the homes, buy cheap, and make a profit on them. So I think, that's the reason people aren't more courageous. And I think it's easy to wonder why aren't people following their convictions? And I think a lot of times it's just that fear of losing money or of your investments or safety but I think a lot of times that fear is something that can be preyed upon and manipulated.
Oh, absolutely. While we were still on the farm, Dad ended up buying the farm eventually, and then a plot of land one neighbor over, and we rented that property to an African-American gentleman with a Jewish wife. And as we were going through that process, there was a petition that was started to keep that from happening. And my mom was at the grocery store, and somebody came up and asked her to sign it, and she said no, she wouldn't. And another neighbor went to the house next door and said, "Here's the petition. Are you going to sign? Are you going to sign it? Do you know who's moving in next door to you?" And the man said, "Well, I haven't met them yet. I don't know if they're nice or not." And so he didn't sign it either, knowing the racial tension there. But it was again that protection, that fear. But there it was happening in that little farming community that Brookfield was back then, the little town center. So whether it's a block, whether it's a a rural area, whatever it is, it always gets down to fear, Adam. It really does. We have a choice every day. We can be afraid, and in nonprofit, you never have what you need, and talking to my board when trying to drive a vision, it's always about risk. When we started Mad Hot, we didn't have any money. We had a vision, we had a dream, and we started it in 3 schools, and eventually we got the $5,000 from a funder, seeing that, okay, I like this, and then we were off and running. But fear can definitely stop you, and you have a choice. We have a choice every day. And if we could just turn off that fear factor when it comes to race and see what we have in common rather than what we have different, oh my, the world would change so quickly, because we have more in common than we have differences.
I think, some of those same underlying, like out in Brookfield, that's something I've been thinking about, and it's not very optimistic, is, looking at Milwaukee 50 years later after the open housing marches, where we saw in the open housing marches young people advocating really merely for their own existence, that they should be able to exist without feeling, as if they can't exist in certain places. And there was a spasm of hatred and anger that responded to that from white folks on the South Side. And, in some ways I feel like looking 50 years later, a lot of that fear and hatred has been baked into the geography of where we live. And we almost live in sort of a monument to the attitudes of those counter demonstrators. That's very pessimistic.
Okay, let me counter that. It is,
Sure.
because it's so easy to get into, the challenges that we have. And I think flipping, something that I've come to realize, I want to fix things. I want to fix people. My first marriage I was sure I could fix them. And very naively. And I'm 62. I'm going to be 63 in June. And if I've learned anything, you can't fix things. You can't fix people. And what you can do, though, is, you can accept, but you can, when I go into a school and I see the challenges that so many kids face, I watch young gentleman dance in the competition we do that dances his heart out. And when we find out why he keeps looking up to the ceiling, it's because his mom had just died, and she had been shot, and she loved to see him dance, and so he was dancing for her. And that ability to, like I said, rise above the situation, to move out of the circumstances you're in, to see the impossible. And that's circling back to what I said, you got to have faith. I forgot what your question was, though.
It's okay. We can. So let's. Can you talk a little bit more about? So you grew up in Milwaukee, you went to Riverside, and you were living in River West. You're walking across the bridge over the Milwaukee River.
No, when we moved back, we bought. My parents found a house near where your parents lived.
Okay.
And it was it was the Grand Exodus, so real estate was good. They bought it for $17,000.
Wow. On the east side.
On the east side, on Shepherd and Locust. And Dad gutted it. He turned it into a loft in a house way before its time, because this was 1969.
Sure.
And so we lived there. And so I walked the other way.
So you walked west on Locust to Riverside. I like that. It feels like to me a lot of times as a Milwaukee Public Schools graduate, a lot of the kids who walk to Riverside, or the kids who went to King, or the kids who went to high school, the arts, kind of leave, like they just tend to gravitate away. And then, so I'm glad that you're still kind of local within the realm of the commute that you used to do.
In that house. I ended up buying the house I grew up in.
Cool.
And marrying my brother's best friend from high school.
Wow.
Riverside.
That's amazing.
I know. That's pretty funny. We ran into each other on a fluke one night or whatever. Everything was aligned.
In Milwaukee?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
I was on the corner of Downer, where Hollander is, right across from CVS. It was Gill's Pizza then.
Yep.
And I was on my way to, can I tell this story?
Yeah. And it was Century probably at the time. There. Was it CVS already?
Oh,
there used to be a Century there. Century grocery store.
I think it was CVS by then.
Or Osco?
It was Osco, because my son worked at Osco.
Okay.
You're right. Well, I was divorced, the only one in my family that had been divorced. I was flat broke. I'd come home. I was totally depressed for Christmas with my son. And I was getting ready to fly back the next day, and I realized I had to get a gift for this investment banker I was dating that was a total schmo. And I had on a baseball cap, a hood. It was snowing. My head was down, and I got to that corner, and I hear Deborah. And I looked up, and there's this man standing there, and it was Todd, my brother's friend from high school. And I don't know how he recognized me, but I was like, Todd? And we talked for a minute, and I was pretty embarrassed because I knew he'd always had a crush on me in high school, and I was just a total snot, my head was up my ass. And I saw him and thought, whoa, I really missed that boat. Here he was, tall, looking like, I don't know, he blew me away. And I barely said a word and went on. The next morning, my dad came to wake me up. Here I am now with my 1-inch modern dance hair, colic sticking up every direction, and said, Todd's downstairs. He heard your mom has cancer. We're down having coffee together. Why don't you come on down and say hi? And I'm like, oh, God. And went down, and by the next year, we were dating. So that's how I ended up coming back to Milwaukee.
That's a great story.
Sorry if I bored you.
No, that's perfect. So we're kind of traveling the route of your life, growing up in Milwaukee, coming back to Milwaukee. Can you then get into how you've launched into, you're at Danceworks now, but kind of how you got your feet back on the ground, or got your feet on the ground professionally here?
I was 45 and I was dancing. I left the theater in my mid-30s when I was hired by a modern dance company in Durham, North Carolina, and I never went back to the theater, and that's late for dance. My training had been in ballet, but my feet are so arched that point was always an impossibility because I had started dancing very late for a dancer. My mom had inspired me to take a class after I'd quit when I was 5. She started dancing in her 40s at Dance Spectrum with Pam Fauci, and I saw her do that and thought, I think I want to try that again. And went to the conservatory with Bill Riley, took a class, loved it. And when I went to Madison, took a ballet class there, though I was in the music school. I was a voice major and kind of theater bound. And Adam, I just always loved to dance. And wherever I went in the theater, I was looking up the dance studios and disappearing to dance. And so mid-30s, then I made that shift. And working, I was at the North Carolina Botanical Garden as well, kind of concurrent, parallel to that, learning business and finance. And after my divorce, had to work there full time and get benefits. And then I really grounded myself in learning about business and actually applied for my MBA at UNC Chapel Hill and got in and started that trajectory and ended up just deciding I couldn't do it all and didn't go ahead with that, kept dancing, and ended up moving to Milwaukee then and did my MFA because I thought that would be a way to connect me to the community at that point in my career. I mean, at that point, how could I prove myself as a dancer? I had many, many students in Chapel Hill. I'd performed, but no one was going to see that in me again. So that was how I grounded myself in the community. It was really challenging. The modern department, remember Ed Burgess and Janet Lilly and Andre Tyson, and I mean, amazing dancers would come every summer and take those classes. And Marsha Parsons was like, sure, you can do your master's. You need to just focus on yourself for a while. Do it. You'll love it. You're going to have such a good time. And I after one class, I knew I was in way over my head with, technique and ability to do contemporary. And after 2 weeks, I had decided that was enough. I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk. I couldn't roll over in bed. I was so sore. I'd pulled all the muscles in my lower extremities. And I finished the class with Ed and decided I was going to walk out. And Janet caught me on the stairs leaving and said, Deb, where are you going? We have an appointment at 1. Did you forget? And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay. And followed her up and told her, I've made a decision. This work isn't for me, Janet. I'm not going to do my MFA. And she said, well, that's interesting because we were just meeting, talking about what a great job you're doing and how thrilled we are to have you here. And see, that is how I think of that story when I look at our kids in the schools. You think you can't do something, you think you're not capable, you think you're not good, and what the people around you see when you begin to just step into territory that demands new things from you and then speak truth into you is amazing. And that's what our kids need in this community. And I believe that can begin to change our community.
Can you talk a little bit about dance itself? So I remember, I'll share a little anecdotal. When I was a kid, I think I've always been a rhythmic person. I've always liked rhythm a lot. And I remember probably seeing like Savion Glover on Sesame Street tap dancing, right? It was probably him or someone tap dancing and just thinking, awesome. Wow, that's what I want to do. So I ended up when I was 5, I think, convincing my mom. It wasn't that hard to convince her. She was very supportive of things, that I should take tap dancing classes. My sister joined, and we took a tap dance class at Danceworks back when it was downtown. Mm-hmm. And
before they got evicted for noise.
I didn't know that. This is a story. Radio Milwaukee almost got evicted for noise when I worked there and we were at central office. We'd have concerts, and literally the people above, I think, were like the HR department. So at one point we had a concert and someone was going to come in and shut it down, but we had like a band on stage. So I took tap dance at Danceworks, and I think I didn't pursue a career in dance. I didn't stick with it that long, but I do think I have come to love dancing as an adult. And it's still kind of like as a response to rhythm. Can you describe, you said you loved dance before, and it's something that shaped the whole direction of your life. I mean, even in times where you're choosing between things, dance was kind of the path that was most compelling to you. And obviously now it's continued to be something you've remained committed to. Like, I'm going to ask you to talk about dance. What is compelling about dancing? Why is dancing something that for you felt so good, and something that and has kind of, you're sort of an evangelist of dance now? What's made you want to preach that gospel?
Well, I was a total klutz. I had no athletic ability whatsoever. I didn't do anything really physical. I was very much in my head. I loved music. I loved imagination. I loved writing. I couldn't run a 50-yard dash without tripping, and I bruised my wrists playing volleyball, and I got ear infections when I swam, and I was the opposite of what you'd think a dancer should be. When I took ballet, I don't know, something happened. I just loved the music, for one, and I think it was that it was safe. They told me what to do. The exercises were very clear. I could just mimic it and follow along, and it became like a mantra, I think. It was a place where I could escape all the busy thoughts in my head and be absorbed by the music, and then that physical activity was so healing, and it's so important to us. It began to, I think, trigger my brain even differently. Marsha Parsons is the guru of brain gym about, cross lateral body integration, and how that fires your brain when you just touch the opposite sides of your body, and it triggers your brain to work in a way that you comprehend better, you become a better reader, and I think that influenced my ability to do well in college and begin to enjoy reading more. And comprehension was always really hard for me before I began to move physically. Mm-hmm. I hated the SAT, all the tests, the tests that you had to do in school. I would totally freeze. So dance began to open up, all right there. I mean, a new way of approaching intellectual activity as well as finding the joy in the physical movement. Then as theater is a very heady thing, and it was a balance to that as well. I could very easily, perfectionism is something that I've always had to battle, and dance would be of course, ballet is so perfectionist driven, but it was a complement to the work that I was doing, and allowed me to escape the overthinking that I would do that was negative for the good of my growth. So that's kind of the start of it, and then it just kept going from there. Then as life got tough, my marriage got tough, very difficult challenges, it became an escape for me, and really a safety net for me. And I dealt with abuse, and it was a doctor that I could never talk about it, and a doctor finally asked me, how's the relationship in your life? And I had never articulated it before, but I could say it's not good. And it was the first time that I could begin the path to healing what I needed to in myself. And dance had been a safety net for me. It kept me strong. It kept me inspired when I could have really lost myself, my spirit.
Can you talk then how you landed at Danceworks? So it felt like there was something. There's a belief you had in dance, and it sounded like it a role in your life, in kind of healing you and being a place that you could kind of escape to, but also develop yourself in. So how did you kind of end up at Danceworks?
Well, I'll just skip ahead from. I spent some time at Milwaukee Ballet as well. That was, I loved Milwaukee Ballet. My sister danced from Milwaukee Ballet, and I had really reached a level of doing all I could there. I was in many different areas, kind of jumping around, and I had guested for Danceworks Performance Company because of the connection I made with Sarah at UWM and the other dancers, and I had taught some classes. I think I'd subbed some classes. And it was funny. Sarah and I were talking in the lobby one day. Here I am doing my MFA in dance, and I was 45. And I said, Sarah, I don't know why I'm doing this, but who knows? Maybe I'll be executive director of this organization one day. And it was, Adam, seriously, it was like within 3 weeks I got a call that they were looking for an executive director.
Wow.
So that was, again, like meeting Todd. I think, things align and open up at the right time.
For sure. So you got hired as executive director. What did that feel like as you looked at what Danceworks was? Because it's very different. Its existence now is very different than it was then, from my understanding of Danceworks.
And you asked what drew me to it, because it was tough. There was it was on shaky ground then, and the budget was a little over $300,000, and there was funding that wasn't going to continue. So I was looking at maybe $40,000-$60,000 shortfall in that first year, and there were a lot of there were staff that needed to be let go of. The board had told me, and I couldn't just come in and fire people. You have to get to know who they are, and so I had to work my way through all of that. But what I saw was the commitment of the work to the community, where that's what excited me, and where the potential opportunity was. I remember Tom Strini interviewed me and asked, what new sexy thing are you going to do with the company? And I trusted Sarah to be taking care of that, innovative and quirky, and the company. I didn't really, I wasn't focusing on the artistic creativity of the work that was necessary. It was, how do we connect this work to the community in a meaningful way? If I had opportunity to be exposed to dance the way I was, who else needs that exposure? Who else is hurting? Who else is suffering right now that needs a little bit of hope or a little bit of connection to something that can show them their value? And that's what excited me. So I told Tom, I'm excited about the community program, and he just kind of looked at me. And 7 years later, he said, Deb, you were way ahead of your time.
It strikes me how much I am a child of all of this, just in that, so the listener may not know, my mother worked at Danceworks at the time. She was I don't know what her title was, but she started a thing called Dreamtime Studio. I know she ended up being the community outreach director. Tom Strini was a friend of mine in high school at King. I was around Tom a little bit as well, like at his house. So I didn't really realize it at the time, but that I was sort of in kind of a specific community. I mean, I know that there were many more people outside of that I didn't know, but like Polly Morris, who now is a person who I still work with and collaborate with. She was at Danceworks at one point. So
woman of impact, she and Mary Newton. I mean, they're the founders of Danceworks. We would not be here without either of them.
Right.
They from 1992 until I was hired in 2002, they just did whatever needed to be done to run that organization.
So I think in some ways I owe a debt of gratitude to kind of sort of what we were talking about before we even started recording, is that what's normal to you. I think of kind of what I saw that felt normal to me at Danceworks growing up, like when Willie Denton Foss and I would like eat brownies under a table while watching modern dance. I mean, for me, like for a lot of people, modern dance might feel weird or unusual, and that's just sort of like very, not like normal to me necessarily, but it's something that I don't question, right? Or it's something that just sort of was part of how I understood what art was or what culture was. So can you then, so you're at the reins of Danceworks. You've kind of identified for yourself its juncture with the community being where you want to grow. And then, you know, in a story, this is sort of always the montage fast forward part where, you know, see the montage of 15 years happening and little by little things grow. What were some of the landmarks in there for you as you kind of were at the ED of a major dance organization in Milwaukee, and then now is even more major, but can you kind of talk about that arc of growth?
Oh, sure. The first challenge was figuring out how much money we actually had and making sure that the business side of things were in line. We got audited, and there were a lot of, you know, the administrative things to work through. And once I felt sure about that, I did board development work through Nonprofit Management Fund, funded it. And we were able to bring on Tim Frauci. And that was the beginning of a new Danceworks with Tim. We worked together. We were, I think, you know, maybe not total opposites, but brought different strengths to the table. And I think we challenged each other. He certainly toughened me, and I do believe I softened him a little bit. But we worked together closely for 9 years. And what he did for the organization in building credibility with UPAF turned the organization on a new path. And he is an incredible supporter of the arts, and he and Sue both co-chaired UPAF campaigns and work diligently still to make sure to do what they can for a successful campaign for the United Performing Arts Fund. He's one of the more silent saints of the organization. The next landmark was the launching of Mad Hot, and as that board development time, we had talked to Mario and Kathy at that time about coming on Danceworks board, and Kathy was involved with Pearls and Next Act and Chamber Theater and maybe 3 or 4 others, and Mario had said that if he joined one more board, his wife would divorce him and he'd go bankrupt. That was kind of the whole story, and so they turned us down.
I'm glad people are that honest, because I feel like that just happens sometimes, like a person doesn't realize it.
Yeah.
That's a good self-awareness.
Right.
Yeah.
Mario's very honest.
Yeah.
Then a couple years later, I got a call saying, Deb, Kathy and I just saw this great film, Mad Hot Ballroom. You've got to go see it. If you like it, let me know. Give me a call. And so I did. And I called him. He said, if you want to make that happen in Milwaukee, I'll join your board. Let's do it together. And so he came on the board. That was 2007. We launched it in 3 schools, as I think I mentioned already. And by that spring, he made a connection with the producer of the film through a friend of his in New York, who came to be a part of our kickoff at Eline Hall. And 22 schools had lined up for the program. Then we didn't make a single call. Word had traveled really quickly. And through UPAF's endorsement of the program and Paul Matthews, Marcus Center's endorsement, we had that foundation to begin to build. And by the next year, we were in 35, 37. We expanded to...
so it was 3 to 35.
No, 3 to 22.
3 to 22, sorry, miss, and then 35.
35.
That's very incredible growth.
Yeah, and no calls. The demand has always exceeded the supply.
Sure.
But we do the best we can to serve those schools that want the program. We've capped it right now at 60 schools, 120 classrooms, but there are, another 100 classrooms that we could be serving easily. So that's where we are now. But to get back to your question, the landmark, so that from Mad Hot, then it was UPAF stayed with us and walked with us through the years, growing as the organization grew about $100,000 a year. Our allocation grew about $10,000 a year. When I started, we were at about $20,000. We went up to close to $200,000. Now we've dropped back down just because of allocation, but about $150,000, $160,000, which is UPAF is our largest funder, and it's what is important to the organization, and that I've always seen is the credibility, but the awareness that they are able to provide for an organization like Danceworks, small, and the credibility. That's been invaluable. You can't put a price tag on that. And we've always worked together in a partnership, I have felt, understanding the value of the work that we do, though the performance piece has been growing substantially, as everything else has, our classes, 100 classes a week. The community work is where most awareness falls, and people will often question, why is Danceworks a member of UPAF? Well, I will say quickly that dance is a performing art, and we're not a social service agency. We're not an education agency. We are a performing arts company, and performing artists lead all of our work, and our work in the schools, in elder sites, and you have the quality. All of our classes are taught by professional dancers. You have even our fitness classes, and you have the quality of the artist and that creativity being poured into everything that we do. That differentiates us from other social service organizations doing similar work with youth development, et cetera.
So you've the growth that you've experienced in the 15 years, now you're entering your 16th year as ED. It's been rapid, like you've grown.
Do you think?
It feels,
slow and steady.
Slow and steady. So, but consistent. In the kind of the point the question I have for you is just, as you grow, I heard someone say this week, mission creep is the death of a nonprofit. As you grew, even just growing can be the death of a nonprofit. Can you talk about just kind of keeping everything together, of being sort of the steward of the organization, the keeper of the mission and the vision, collaborating with your board through growth, and kind of some of the challenges that you may have faced in growing and some of the natural growing pains that might happen?
Yeah, a couple things. Can I first say that a nonprofit has got to be inspired by and focused on the mission. And if the mission isn't driving the work, if it doesn't make your heart kind of race to fulfill it, then you're missing, I think, the gasoline that's going to drive you through the real challenges of never having enough money. But I think for myself, I was invited to do a panel for Business Journal on confidence, women and confidence, and my area was creativity, confidence and creativity. And as I spoke on that panel, I felt that I shortchanged a big part of myself, and I regretted it. I was being careful to be socially correct and wanted to probably appear, to be businesslike for the Business Journal, and I didn't want to cross a line. And when I was asked, what do you do Monday morning, what would you suggest someone does Monday morning before they take off and step into the workplace? What is the most important thing to you? And what's most important to me is time. I get up, I read my Bible, I write, I pray 2 hours every morning, and the time flies. And what I tell my staff or anybody that I hire, I don't expect people to have my faith, but what I do, or be like-minded. I like having people that disagree with me around me, that challenge me, and that that complement what I bring to the organization. So it's not that I need a Christian-run organization. But what is important to me is that you put first faith, or whatever it is that you experience or do for yourself to feed yourself up so you're full to give. Family is second, and then career is third. That priority is what I was raised on, and what I slowly, very slowly came to learn to value. And now, Adam, when I turned 50, I had I'd been through many tough years, and a divorce, and a lot of challenges being in the arts and an artist, and my idea of what success was, and what I wanted to be, and what the reality of that was as I discovered it. And I came to a place where my parents were always, "How's your faith?" And I was like, "Oh, can't you just ask about me, please?
Sure.
Why do you always ask about that?" And my mom would say, "What are you so afraid of? Why do you feel you're going to lose something if you open yourself up to an experience of faith?" And I don't know what it was. I think I felt protective, or I didn't want to become something that somebody said I had to be. I wanted to be true to myself and evolve from within. And I determined, though, at 50 that I wanted to spend the next decade opening myself up to faith. And I did. And I was invited to dance for a new church that was planted downtown. And I got involved in that church and ended up actually being the president of the council. And it was, don't get me wrong, the most challenging experience of my life. And it did not go well at all. And it almost drove me away from the church. And that's what happens when you make a commitment to something. You're going to be tested on every front, and you better be prepared for that.
For sure.
Just like running a nonprofit. If you determine that you want to see that mission come to fulfillment,
right,
you're going to be tested in the most vulnerable places that you have, and you could either be broken down or you could be built up. So faith, answer to my question, is where I've got to start every day, get my head in the right place, my value system, and from there, I fill myself up so I can pour out. And that's what it means to be an artist.
Sure.
I'm so weary of hearing the arts aren't supported, artists don't have enough. We have such creative potential within us and such creative dynamite that we should be pouring out every day. It's not what we need from the community as arts organizations. It's what we are already doing, pouring into it. And so we've got to flip that somehow and connect the dots of all that's being done in this community already, and understand that it's rich, not poor, in resources for creativity in the arts.
So you just touched on a lot of things, and I think the scarcity narrative by which we're sort of controlled in Milwaukee, that's something I've been meditating on since I started working at 88.9 and started really engaging in a lot of what community development was happening in Milwaukee and continues to happen, of looking at the abundance mindset. And I think I've kind of been in a dance with scarcity and abundance since then, because there's a real scarcity that exists, but there's also, that being sort of controlled by the trance of scarcity can put you into a position where you can never break free from it. And then I think that the adherence to the gospel of abundance, I think, is important, or that kind of that position, that posture towards how you approach life. But it can also be also a little bit of a mirage sometimes. So I think it's not one way or the other. So, but I think it's a very important framework for understanding the city, of how scarcity drives how we behave. Because even at the very top, I think the most scarcity-driven behaviors are those with the most here in Milwaukee. If you look at how people at the very top of the hierarchy of Milwaukee behave, a lot of times they're the ones that are the biggest buyers into the scarcity mindset.
Well, and then what is abundance? And, the prosperity gospel, I think, is a real misnomer and misconception of what abundance in my understanding of it is. I think abundant blessing, what would you value most in your life if you could have all of it? What would you want? What if you could name 3 things that you want in your life abundantly, what would it be?
Are you asking me right now?
I am.
That's a good, so 3. Well, I'll tell you what one isn't, because I think about this quite often. And one, if I just, because you framed it as 3 things I could just have, one of them wouldn't be money, I don't think. I think community would be one. I think we live in a time where people are inundated and overwhelmed by a torrent of voices and of ideas and of sort of the specter of relationships, when we sort of are starving in terms of actual connection and people in community. So community would be one. I think another one would be purpose, I guess. I really, I feel pretty connected to the things that I do, but I know that that's always sort of, that's a constant challenge, is like how connected are you to a purpose. And I guess the last one, and I'm kind of making these up, so I might listen to this later and be like, those are all wrong. I think the last one would be sort of courage.
Oh, awesome. See, okay. Well, now, if there's scarcity, what's scarce? Where are you putting your values? Yours are very much like mine. I would say first comes to my mind is peace of mind, peace. If we could have that in abundance, how awesome would that be? And this is coming from an overthinker. Secondly, I agree with the community piece, the relationships, the rich, fulfilling relationships, love, right? Purpose, though, if we don't have purpose, why are we here? So I think you nailed it, and you can't do that without courage. So, we're very much alike in our thinking there. So I would ask people that feel there isn't enough to go around, what's missing in their lives, really, and what could change that? What do they value? And where are they headed? What are their goals with that? So it becomes a very different discussion. And I've been in stores where I had to choose between popcorn and potatoes. I always choose popcorn because it could be a party. I always felt it was a party. So it's not that I haven't, my gosh, I lived for years, out of a van, an old Ford van with my ex-husband, going from job to job and barely getting by. But we were in the theater and doing, we had purpose. Sorry, you were going to say something.
That's okay. No, we're actually getting close to wanting to wind down. And this has been a really fun conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Did we end on a downer there?
No, I think that's a really good place to end.
No,
or we're getting close to end.
Yeah.
And I think the last piece I kind of want to talk about is the idea of women of impact, which is sort of the theme that we're convening this show around. And can you talk a little bit about sort of the operative words there, a woman of impact? You've, in the last 16 years, worked with a team in Danceworks to grow something really incredible. Can you talk about kind of and also too, within Danceworks, a lot of incredibly strong women. I mean, I remember being in grade school and middle school and high school and like looking up to people like Sarah Wilbur and Danny and kind of being in awe of who they were. So can you talk a little bit about being part of that project of Danceworks, and kind of being both a woman and creating impact here in this city?
I would never, when I heard the title Woman of Impact, I was just thinking, who are the women of impact? In our city, it's, and at Danceworks, it's, boy, I have to, I can talk internally, but I think I feel driven to speak on behalf of those who wouldn't have that opportunity to speak. As artists do, we have that platform to be present in the community. I think of a principal at a school where I walked in, and running a school, can I say names?
Sure.
Ava Morris, Brown Street Academy. I saw her yesterday. I remember when I was going through probably the toughest time at Danceworks and wondering if I could really make it through. And I walked in to visit a class and sat down in her office, and she asked how I was doing and very quickly said, "Oh, I've got something for you. I've got a word for you," and wrote down a scripture on a piece of paper and folded it up and gave it to me. And I think of the encouragement that happens on a daily basis throughout our schools, throughout our homes, throughout our workplaces and our cities, of women that speak a word of hope into another person's life. And that's impact. Mm-hmm. That's what we need more of. Those are the types of women that I have the great privilege of being a part of every day, because my job does get me out, and because I'm connected to artists on site. I'm connected to students that come in through the doors, and to audience, and to colleagues that have inspired me and poured into me without even knowing it. It's, how do I answer that question? Because it becomes about the gift you give at the simplest level, not the great achievement that the world would acknowledge, but how you connect to another human being. Mm-hmm. That's impact.
I don't need to add anything to that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.